Billionaire CEO evicts poor tenant, sees her name on the building deed. The eviction notice slid under the door at 6:47 in the morning. No knock. No warning. Just a thin sheet of paper that changed everything. Maribel Shaw picked it up with hands that didn't shake. Read it once. Then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer already heavy with documents she had never shown anyone. The notice was clinical. Direct. Final. Notice of eviction. Unit 4B. Tenant, Maribel Shaw. Reason. Property redevelopment. Vacate within 30 days. At the bottom, a signature she recognized from newspaper articles and business magazines. Victor Langford. Billionaire. Real estate mogul. The man who owned half the city's skyline. The man who had no idea who she really was. Maribel stood in her small apartment. Faded wallpaper. A kitchen table older than most marriages. A single photograph on the mantel, her father, smiling in front of a building that looked nothing like it did now. She didn't cry. She didn't call a lawyer. She just made tea and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. Because Maribel Shaw knew something Victor Langford didn't. She wasn't just a tenant. She was an owner. Have you ever been dismissed because someone assumed they knew your worth? Have you ever watched powerful people make decisions about your life without asking a single question? This is the story of a billionaire who saw buildings but never people. A woman who chose silence over power. And the moment everything he built revealed a foundation he never knew existed. Stay until the end to hear what happened when the eviction became impossible. And to find out whether some mistakes can be undone once the truth refuses to stay buried. If you believe that quiet strength is still strength, hit that like button right now. And subscribe to Mr. Ellington Love Lines, where every story proves that power doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it just waits. The building was old. Not historic. Not charming. Just old. 7 stories of weathered brick and rusted fire escapes. The kind of place developers looked at and saw only one thing, potential. Potential for demolition. For glass towers. For luxury condos with names like The Meridian or Sky Loft. Maribel Shaw had lived in Unit 4B for 12 years. She paid her rent on time. Mostly. Sometimes a few days late when money was tight. But she always paid. She kept to herself. Didn't complain about the broken elevator or the heating that rattled through cold winters. Didn't join the tenant meetings or sign the petitions when rumors of redevelopment first started circulating. She just lived quietly. The other tenants knew her as the woman who worked at the public library. Who carried groceries in reusable bags. Who said good morning but never lingered for conversation. They assumed she was poor. They weren't wrong about her lifestyle. But they were wrong about everything else. The morning the eviction notice arrived, Maribel had been awake for an hour already. She rose early. Always had. A habit from years of opening the library before dawn, shelving books in the peaceful silence before patrons arrived. She saw the paper slide under her door. Heard footsteps retreat down the hallway. She knew what it was before she picked it up. The notice was printed on expensive letterhead. Langford Properties LLC. The logo was minimalist. Professional. Cold. She read it standing in her doorway, still in her bathrobe. Dear tenant, pursuant to Municipal Code 14.7b, this property has been designated for comprehensive redevelopment. All residential leases are hereby terminated effective 30 days from the date of this notice. Compensation details and relocation resources are available through the contact information below. No apology. No acknowledgement that 30 days was barely enough time to pack a life. Just efficiency. Maribel closed the door quietly. She walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. While the water heated, she opened the drawer beside the refrigerator. Not the junk drawer. The other one. The one she kept locked with a small brass key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were documents. Decades old. Yellowed at the edges. But still legally binding. A deed. A trust agreement. Incorporation papers from 1983. And a name that appeared on every page. Harold Shaw. Co-founder. Her father. She touched the papers gently. Then closed the drawer and locked it again. The kettle whistled. Maribel made her tea, chamomile, no sugar, and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved. Taxis honked. People rushed to work. Construction crews tore down another old building 2 blocks away, the sound of jackhammers echoing through the morning air. She sipped her tea and didn't think about where she would go. She thought about her father. About the building. About the choice she had made years ago to stay invisible. And about the man who just signed an eviction notice without ever asking who she was. Downstairs, in the lobby, other tenants were gathering. Holding identical notices. Voices rising in panic and anger. 30 days. That's illegal. Where are we supposed to go? We should sue. We should call the news. Mrs. Kovac from 2A was crying. Mr. Diaz from 5C was shouting into his phone, trying to reach a lawyer. Maribel heard it all through her open window. But she didn't go downstairs. She just finished her tea, washed the cup, and got dressed for work. Because Maribel Shaw had learned a long time ago that some battles aren't won with noise. They're won with paperwork. And patience. And the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself to be real. Victor Langford stood in his corner office on the 52nd floor of Langford Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view that stretched across the entire downtown skyline. A desk made of reclaimed walnut that cost more than most people's cars. Everything in the room was designed to communicate one thing, dominance. He was on a call with his acquisitions team. The Harrison Street property is cleared? Yes, sir. Eviction notices went out this morning. Any pushback? Nothing significant. A few tenants are upset, but legal says it's airtight. Municipal approval came through last week. Victor nodded, already moving on mentally. Good. I want demolition scheduled for next quarter. Architecture team ready? Standing by. Renderings are done. Pre-sales start in 6 weeks. Excellent. Next property. To Victor Langford, the building on Harrison Street wasn't a home to 43 families. It was asset 7204B. A line item in a portfolio worth $4.3 billion. He had never walked through its hallways. Never met the tenants. Never asked what the building meant to the people who lived there. He didn't need to. Victor had built his empire on a simple philosophy: progress requires clean cuts. Sentiment was a liability. Nostalgia was expensive. And people who couldn't afford to stay in a changing city were, by definition, in the wrong place. He wasn't cruel. At least, he didn't think he was. He offered relocation assistance. Fair market compensation. His legal team ensured everything was done by the book. But he never looked tenants in the eye. He never asked about their lives. He just signed the paperwork and moved on. Victor had been doing this for 25 years. Started as a junior analyst at a commercial real estate firm. Worked his way up. Learned the game. Played it better than anyone else. By 35, he had his own company. By 40, he was a billionaire. By 50, he was untouchable. He told himself he had earned it. That success rewarded vision. That the city was better because of developers like him, people willing to tear down the old and build the new. He believed that wealth was proof of merit. That poverty was proof of poor choices. And that anyone who couldn't keep up simply wasn't trying hard enough. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Langford, your 10 a.m. is here. Send them in." 3 men in expensive suits entered. Lawyers from the firm that handled his acquisitions. They spread documents across the conference table. Harrison Street is moving forward as planned. Demolition permits filed. Architectural approval pending. We should have full clearance by end of month. Victor scanned the papers without reading them closely. Any issues? One minor item. There's a dormant ownership clause we're still tracing. Old incorporation documents from the 80s. Probably nothing, but we want to verify before we finalize. Victor barely looked up. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Make it 1. I want this closed. The lawyers nodded and left. Victor returned to his desk. On his screen was a rendering of the new building. Sleek glass. 32 stories. Luxury unit starting at $2.5 million. He smiled. This was what the city needed. What it deserved. Not crumbling brick and broken elevators. Not tenants who paid late and complained about heat. But progress. Ambition. Excellence. Victor Langford had never failed at anything in his life. And he wasn't about to start now. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that one of the tenants he just evicted held the key to everything he thought he owned. And that the minor item his lawyers were tracing was about to unravel his entire deal. Maribel Shaw wasn't born poor. She was born powerful. And then she chose to let it go. Her father, Harold Shaw, had been a builder. Not the kind who wore suits and signed contracts in boardrooms. The kind who wore work boots and knew the weight of every beam, the angle of every joint. In 1983, Harold Shaw co-founded a small real estate development company with 2 partners, Martin Reeves and Thomas Langford. Thomas Langford. Victor's father. The company was called RSL Properties. Reeves, Shaw, Langford. 3 men with a shared vision: by struggling buildings, renovate them, create affordable housing in a city that was rapidly pushing out working families. It wasn't glamorous work. But it mattered. Harold designed the renovations. Martin handled the finances. Thomas managed the business operations. They were a good team. For a while. The first building they purchased was on Harrison Street. A 7-story walk-up. Crumbling plaster. Broken windows. Tenants who couldn't afford to leave but couldn't afford to stay. Harold saw potential. Not for luxury condos or high-end retail. But for families. For stability. He spent 2 years overseeing the renovation. Did much of the work himself. Made sure every unit had heat. Running water. Safe wiring. He cared about the people who would live there. Because Harold Shaw understood something that his partners didn't. Buildings weren't just investments. They were homes. The renovation was a success. Tenants moved in. Rent was affordable. The building was full within 6 months. RSL Properties grew. They acquired 3 more buildings. Then 5. Then 10. Harold's designs were efficient, functional, and humane. Martin's financial management kept them solvent. Thomas's business acumen expanded their reach. By 1990, RSL Properties was one of the most respected small developers in the city. And then everything changed. Thomas Langford wanted to scale. He wanted to move beyond affordable housing. To target higher-income tenants. To maximize profit margins. Harold resisted. We started this to help people, not price them out. We can do both, Thomas argued. No. We can't. Not the way you're describing. The disagreements became arguments. The arguments became bitter. Martin sided with Thomas. 2 against 1. Harold was outvoted on every major decision. New acquisitions targeted wealthier neighborhoods. Rents increased. Affordable units were converted into market-rate housing. Harold watched the mission dissolve. And then, in 1992, Thomas and Martin made their move. They offered Harold a buyout. Not because they wanted him gone, but because they needed him gone. Harold refused at first. But the pressure mounted. Legal threats. Partnership disputes. Frozen decision-making. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, Harold accepted a settlement. He was paid. Fairly, technically. But he was erased. His name was removed from all corporate documents. RSL Properties became RL Holdings. And then, years later, when Thomas's son Victor took over, it became Langford Properties. Harold Shaw's contributions were buried in archived files no one bothered to read. But Harold had been smart. Before he signed the buyout, he negotiated one condition. A condition his partners didn't fully understand. A condition that would lie dormant for decades. Harold retained partial ownership of the original building. The one on Harrison Street. The one he had renovated with his own hands. The ownership was placed in an irrevocable trust, naming his daughter, Maribel, as the sole beneficiary. The trust couldn't be dissolved. Couldn't be bought out without her consent. And Harold made Maribel promise one thing. Don't use this unless you have to. Stay quiet. Stay safe. Let them think they won. Maribel, only 19 at the time, didn't fully understand. But she promised. And for 30 years, she kept that promise. She lived modestly. Worked quietly. Paid rent on an apartment she technically co-owned. She watched the building change hands twice, saw it fall into disrepair, saw tenants come and go. But she never interfered. She never asserted her rights. She chose anonymity over power. Humility over confrontation. Until the day Victor Langford, son of the man who erased her father, slid an eviction notice under her door. Harold Shaw died in 2015. Quietly. At home. In a small house he'd bought with the buyout money. Maribel was with him. He was 73. She was 42. In the final weeks, they talked about everything. The buildings he'd renovated. The families he'd helped. The betrayal that ended his career. And the trust he'd created to protect her. I never wanted revenge, Harold told her one evening, his voice weak but clear. I just wanted to make sure they couldn't erase everything. Maribel held his hand. They didn't erase you, Dad. I remember. The tenants remember. Harold smiled faintly. Memory isn't ownership, Mari. That trust, it's proof. Legal proof. That I was there. That I built something real. He paused, struggling for breath. But you don't have to use it. You hear me? You don't owe anyone anything. Not me. Not them. I know. Stay safe. Stay quiet. Live your life. Maribel nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. Harold died 3 days later. At the funeral, only a handful of people attended. Former tenants. Old friends. A few colleagues from Harold's years in construction. No one from RL Holdings. No one from Langford Properties. To them, Harold Shaw had ceased to exist decades ago. Maribel buried her father in a modest cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The headstone was simple. Harold Shaw. 1942 to 2015. Builder. Father. Friend. After the funeral, Maribel went home to the apartment on Harrison Street. The building her father had saved. The building that still bore no trace of his name. She unlocked the drawer where she kept the trust documents. Spread them across the kitchen table. Read them for the 100th time. Irrevocable trust agreement. Dated March 15, 1992. Property, 447, Harrison Street. Beneficiary, Maribel Shaw. Terms, 40% ownership interest. Cannot be dissolved, transferred, or purchased without written consent of beneficiary. She traced her finger over her father's signature. Then folded the documents and locked them away again. Maribel Shaw could have used that trust at any time. She could have walked into Langford Properties and demanded recognition. She could have sued for her father's erased legacy. She could have stopped the sale, blocked the acquisitions, reclaimed the narrative. But she didn't. Because her father had asked her not to. And because Maribel believed that power didn't need to be loud to be real. So she went back to work at the library. Shelved books. Helped patrons. Lived simply. And waited. Not for revenge. Just for the moment when silence would speak louder than anything she could say. The locks were changed on a Tuesday morning. Maribel came home from work to find a new deadbolt on her door. Her key didn't fit. She stood in the hallway, groceries in hand, staring at the unfamiliar lock. A worker in a Langford Properties uniform walked past. "Excuse me," Maribel said. "I live here. My key doesn't work." The worker barely glanced at her. "Building's been cleared. If you got an eviction notice, you were supposed to vacate." The notice said 30 days. "It's only been 3 weeks." He shrugged. "Take it up with the office. I just changed the locks." He walked away. Maribel stood there for a long moment. Then she set her groceries down and called the number on the eviction notice. The line rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Langford Properties, how can I help you?" "This is Maribel Shaw, Unit 4B, 447, Harrison Street. I came home and my locks have been changed. I still have a week left according to the notice." A pause. "Let me check, okay, yes." The property manager accelerated the timeline. All units needed to be cleared by today for safety inspections. "I wasn't notified. The updated notice was posted in the lobby. I didn't see it." Another pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the unit is no longer accessible. Your belongings have been packed and placed in storage. You can retrieve them from our facility on 3rd Street." Maribel's grip tightened on the phone. "You packed my belongings?" Standard procedure for accelerated evictions. "Everything is safe. You'll need ID to claim it. This is illegal." "Ma'am, if you have concerns, you're welcome to consult an attorney. But the eviction is legally binding, and the timeline adjustment was within municipal code. Have a good day." Click. Maribel lowered the phone slowly. Around her, the hallway was empty. Silent. Most of the other tenants were already gone. She could hear distant hammering from the upper floors. Demolition had already begun. Maribel picked up her groceries and walked back downstairs. In the lobby, a sign had been posted on the wall. Notice, final clearance date moved to October 14th. All tenants must vacate immediately. October 14th. Yesterday. Maribel folded the eviction notice she still carried in her purse and placed it carefully in her bag. Then she left the building. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just walked to the bus stop and rode across town to the storage facility on 3rd Street. Inside, a bored clerk checked her ID and led her to a cage filled with cardboard boxes. Her life. Packed by strangers. Maribel opened one box. Inside were her dishes. Wrapped in newspaper. Another box, books. Her father's old. A third, clothes. Photos. The framed picture of Harold in front of the building. Everything was there. Everything except dignity. Maribel signed the retrieval form and arranged for the boxes to be delivered to a friend's apartment where she'd be staying temporarily. Then she walked outside into the late afternoon sun. And for the first time in 30 years, she made a decision. She was done being silent. Not because she was angry. But because silence had done its job. It had kept her safe. It had protected her father's wishes. But now, the building, her building, was about to be erased. Just like her father had been. And Maribel Shaw wasn't going to let that happen twice. The documents sat in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Maribel had kept them there since her father's death. She visited the bank the morning after the locks were changed. The vault was cool. Quiet. The kind of place where secrets rested undisturbed. She opened the box and removed a thick manila envelope. Inside, the original trust agreement. Incorporation papers from RSL Properties. Harold's buyout settlement. And a letter her father had written shortly before he died. Maribel hadn't read the letter in years. She unfolded it carefully. My dearest Mari. If you're reading this again, something has happened. Something that made you reconsider what I asked of you. I want you to know, I don't blame you. I asked you to stay quiet because I was tired. Because I didn't want you dragged into the fights I lost. But you're not me. And if the time comes when staying quiet costs more than speaking up, then speak. The trust one created isn't just about ownership. It's about proof. Proof that I existed. Proof that I built something. Proof that they can't erase everyone. Use it if you need to. Or don't. The choice is yours. But know this, you have power. Real power. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that just is. I love you. Always. Dad. Maribel folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then she gathered the documents and left the bank. She had one stop to make before anything else. The law office of Chris and Associates. A small firm that specialized in property law. She'd called ahead. Made an appointment. The receptionist led her to a modest conference room. 10 minutes later, a woman in her 40s entered. Attorney Linda Chris. Ms. Shaw. Thank you for coming in. You mentioned on the phone that you have documents related to a property dispute. Maribel slid the envelope across the table. I need you to tell me if these are still legally enforceable. Linda opened the envelope and began reading. Her expression shifted. Where did you get these? My father. He was one of the original co-founders of the company that became Langford Properties. Linda looked up sharply. Langford Properties? The real estate firm? Yes. Linda returned to the documents. Read them more carefully. After several minutes, she set them down. Ms. Shaw, these documents are extraordinary. Are they valid? Absolutely. This trust is ironclad. Your father structured it brilliantly. It can't be dissolved without your written consent. And according to this, you hold a 40% ownership stake in the property at 447, Harrison Street. That building is about to be demolished. Linda's eyes widened. Does Langford Properties know about this? I don't think so. Then they're about to have a serious problem. Maribel nodded slowly. Can you help me? Linda smiled. Ms. Shaw, it would be my honor. Victor Langford was in the middle of a conference call when his lead attorney walked into his office without knocking. Victor muted the call. This better be important. The attorney, David Grayson, set a file on the desk. We have a problem with Harrison Street. What kind of problem? The ownership issue we flagged last month? It's not minor. Victor opened the file. Inside were copies of documents he'd never seen. Trust agreements. Incorporation papers dated 1983. And a name that made his blood run cold. Harold Shaw. Who is Harold Shaw? David sat down heavily. He was one of the original co-founders of RSL Properties. Your father's first company. My father never mentioned him. That's because he was bought out in 1992. Quietly. The records were buried. So what's the problem? David pointed to a specific clause in the trust agreement. Shaw negotiated a retention of ownership before he left. 40% of the Harrison Street property. The ownership was placed in an irrevocable trust. Victor's jaw tightened. How is that possible? We've owned that building outright for 20 years. Technically, you've owned 60%. The other 40% has been dormant. The trust beneficiary never activated their rights. Until now. Until now. Victor leaned back in his chair. Who's the beneficiary? David flipped a page. Maribel Shaw. Daughter of Harold Shaw. Victor stared at the name. Maribel Shaw. Yes. That's one of the tenants. Unit 4B. David nodded grimly. Yes, sir. The room went completely silent. Victor's mind raced. He'd evicted her. Changed her locks. Packed her belongings. Treated her like an obstacle. And the entire time, she'd been an owner. How did we miss this? The trust was filed under Shaw's original company name. When RL Holdings absorbed RSL Properties, the documents weren't fully integrated. They'd been sitting in archive storage for 30 years. Victor stood and walked to the window. Can we buy her out? Not without her consent. And according to the trust terms, she has final approval over any sale or demolition. So if she says no, the deal is dead. Victor turned. Get her on the phone. Now. Sir, she's retained legal counsel. Attorney Linda Chris. They've filed a formal objection to the demolition. Victor's hands curled into fists. When? This morning. He closed his eyes. Cancel everything. I need to handle this personally. David hesitated. Sir, with all due respect, you might want to let the lawyers. I said I'll handle it. David nodded and left. Victor stood alone in his office, staring at the name on the page. Maribel Shaw. The quiet tenant who never complained. Who paid late sometimes but always paid. Who he dismissed as insignificant. She'd been an owner the entire time. And he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. Victor Langford sat in the back of his car, staring at his phone. He'd been staring at it for 10 minutes. On the screen was Maribel Shaw's contact information. A phone number his assistant had pulled from the original lease application. He should call her. He should apologize. He should try to fix this before it became a public disaster. But Victor Langford didn't apologize. Not to tenants. Not to anyone. Instead, he made a different call. David, I need everything we have on Maribel Shaw. Employment history. Financial records. I want to know who I'm dealing with. Sir, she's an owner. You can't. I'm not intimidating her. I'm preparing. There's a difference. A pause. I'll have it within the hour. Victor hung up and stared out the window. The car moved through afternoon traffic, past buildings he owned, developments he'd built, properties that bore his name. He'd spent 25 years building an empire. And now, a woman he'd never met might take it all apart. An hour later, David sent the file. Victor opened it on his tablet. Maribel Shaw. Age 52. Employed, City Public Library, Reference Department. Salary, $38,000 per year. No criminal record. No significant assets. No outstanding debts. Education. BA in Library Science, City College, 1995. Family, Father Harold Shaw, deceased 2015. Mother Margaret Shaw, deceased 2001. No siblings. No children. Current residence, temporary. Staying with friend at 2240 Oak Street. Victor read it twice. She lived simply. Worked a modest job. Had nothing except the documents her father left her. She was exactly who she appeared to be. Except for one detail. She owned 40% of his building. Victor set down the tablet and leaned back. He could fight her in court. Drag it out. Exhaust her resources. But that would take years. And the negative press would be catastrophic. Or he could try something else. He could meet her. Face to face. And try to understand who she was before he decided what to do next. Victor made the call. Linda Chris answered on the second ring. Mr. Langford. I was expecting your call. I'd like to meet with your client. I'm sure you would. Off the record. No lawyers. Just a conversation. Why? Because I want to understand what she wants. Linda was silent for a moment. I'll ask her. But I won't promise anything. Tell her I'm willing to listen. You should have been willing to listen before you evicted her. Victor winced. I know. I'll call you back. She hung up. Victor sat in the silence of his car, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. Linda Chris called back 3 hours later. She'll meet you. Victor exhaled. When? Tomorrow. 2 p.m. Cafe Blanca on 4th Street. I'll be there. Mr. Langford. Yes. Don't bring lawyers. Don't bring security. Don't bring your ego. Just come alone and be ready to listen. Understood. Linda hung up. Victor spent the rest of the day in a fog. He canceled 2 meetings. Ignored calls. Sat in his office staring at the rendering of the new building that would never be built. Not unless Maribel Shaw agreed. And why would she? He'd evicted her. Displaced her. Treated her like she was nothing. Victor had spent his entire career believing that wealth justified itself. That success proved merit. That anyone who couldn't keep up simply didn't belong. But now, sitting alone in his office, he felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. What if he'd been wrong? Not just about Maribel. About everything. The next afternoon, Victor arrived at Cafe Blanca 10 minutes early. It was a small place. Neighborhood spot. The kind of cafe he'd never noticed before because it wasn't worth noticing. He ordered coffee and sat by the window. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened. Maribel Shaw walked in. She was smaller than he'd expected. Quiet. Wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans. She scanned the room, found him, and walked over. Victor stood. Ms. Shaw. Thank you for coming. She didn't shake his hand. Mr. Langford. They sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Maribel broke the silence. Why did you want to meet? Victor hesitated. Because I made a mistake. You made several. Yes. I did. Maribel's gaze was steady. What do you want from me? To understand what you want. You mean you want to know how much it will cost to make me go away? Victor flinched. No. That's not. Isn't it? She leaned forward slightly. You evicted 43 families without asking a single question. You changed locks. You packed belongings. You treated people like obstacles. Her voice was quiet. Calm. But every word landed like a hammer. And now you find out one of those obstacles owns the building. And suddenly you want to talk. Victor looked down at his coffee. You're right. I know I am. He looked up. I'm sorry. Maribel studied him. Are you sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught? Victor opened his mouth. Closed it. He didn't have an answer. Maribel stood. When you figure that out, call me. She walked toward the door. Victor found his voice. Wait. She stopped. Please. Maribel turned. Victor stood, his voice raw. I'm sorry I did it. Not because you own the building. But because it was wrong. All of it. And I've been doing it for 25 years without ever asking if it was right. Maribel's expression softened. Just slightly. She walked back to the table and sat down. Tell me about my father. Victor blinked. What? You wanted to understand what I want. I want you to tell me what you know about Harold Shaw. Victor shifted uncomfortably. I don't know much. The records say he was a co-founder. That he left in 1992. He didn't leave. He was pushed out. By who? Your father. And his partner. Victor's face went pale. My father never mentioned him. Of course he didn't. It's easier to erase someone than to admit you betrayed them. Maribel's voice remained steady. Not angry. Just factual. My father built that building with his own hands. He designed every renovation. He cared about every tenant. He believed housing should be affordable. That people mattered more than profit. She paused. Your father and Martin Reeves disagreed. They wanted to maximize returns. Scale up. Push out the poor. My father fought them. And he lost. Victor listened, unable to speak. They gave him a buyout. Made him sign away his name. Erased him from the company history. But he was smart. He kept one thing. The trust. Maribel nodded. 40% ownership. Irrevocable. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it so I would have proof. Proof that he existed. That he built something real. She looked directly at Victor. And then you tried to demolish the only thing that proved he mattered. Victor felt something break inside him. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Shame. I didn't know. You didn't ask. The words hung in the air. Victor took a shaky breath. What can I do? Do you mean that? Yes. Maribel studied him for a long moment. Then stop the demolition. Preserve the building. Restore it properly. And put my father's name back where it belongs. Victor nodded slowly. And if I do that, will you allow the renovation? If it's done right. If the tenants are protected. If it remains affordable. Victor met her gaze. I'll make it happen. I want it in writing. You'll have it. Maribel stood again. Mr. Langford, I didn't come here for money. I came here because I'm tired of watching powerful people erase the powerless. My father was erased. Those tenants were erased. And I'm done being silent. She picked up her bag. You have one chance to get this right. Don't waste it. And then she walked out. Victor sat alone in the cafe, staring at his cold coffee. For the first time in his life, he understood what his father had done. And he understood that inheriting an empire built on erasure meant inheriting the debt that came with it. Quick question, have you ever discovered that the foundation you built your life on wasn't as solid as you thought? That success came at a cost you didn't know you were paying. Drop a comment about a time you had to face an uncomfortable truth. And if this story is reminding you that real power doesn't need to be loud, share it with someone who needs to hear it. 3 days later, Victor Langford called an emergency board meeting. His executive team filed into the conference room. Lawyers. Financial advisors. The head of acquisitions. They expected a routine update on the Harrison Street project. Instead, Victor stood at the head of the table and said something none of them anticipated. The Harrison Street demolition is cancelled. Silence. Then chaos. What? Victor, we've already filed permits. We have pre-sales commitments. The investors are expecting. Victor raised his hand. I'm aware. And I'm canceling it anyway. His CFO, Gerald, leaned forward. On what grounds? Legal complications. There's an ownership dispute we can't resolve through demolition. Then buy them out. I tried. They're not interested in selling. Gerald's face reddened. Who is they? A trust beneficiary. 40% owner. The claim is legitimate. David Grayson, the lead attorney, nodded reluctantly. I've reviewed the documents. The trust is ironclad. We can't proceed without their consent. Gerald slammed his hand on the table. So we're going to let one tenant derail a $200 million project? She's not just a tenant, Victor said quietly. She's an owner. And she has every legal right to block this. Then we sue. We find a loophole. We. No. Gerald stared at him. No. We're not suing. We're not fighting this. We're going to do what we should have done from the beginning. Which is? We're going to renovate the building properly. Preserve it. Keep it affordable. And protect the tenants. The room erupted again. That's financial suicide. We'll lose millions. The investors will pull out. Victor's voice cut through the noise. Then let them pull out. Everyone went silent. Victor looked around the table. For 25 years, I've built this company on a simple model. Buy low. Displace tenants. Build high. Sell higher. And I told myself it was progress. That I was improving the city. He paused. But I was wrong. Gerald's jaw dropped. Victor. I was wrong. And I'm not doing it anymore. He turned to David. Draft a new agreement. Full renovation. Affordable housing protections. Tenant relocation assistance during construction. And I want a memorial plaque installed honoring the original builder. Who? Harold Shaw. The man my father erased. David nodded slowly. I'll have it ready by end of week. Gerald stood. Victor, I can't support this. The board won't support this. Then the board can vote me out. Gerald stared at him. Then walked out of the room. 2 other executives followed. Victor looked at the remaining team members. Anyone else? No one moved. Good. Then let's get to work. After the meeting, David stayed behind. That was brave. No, Victor said. That was overdue. What changed? Victor thought about Maribel. About her father. About the building that held more history than he'd ever bothered to learn. I met someone who reminded me what I'd forgotten. Which is? That buildings aren't just investments. They're homes. And the people inside them matter more than the profit margin. David smiled slightly. Your father wouldn't have agreed. I know. And maybe that's the point. Victor stood and walked to the window. Below, the city stretched out. Towers he'd built. Developments he'd funded. A skyline shaped by ambition. But also by displacement. By erasure. By people who'd been pushed out to make room for people who could afford more. Victor had spent his whole life believing that success justified itself. But Maribel Shaw had shown him something else. That sometimes, the cost of success was too high. And that real power wasn't about building higher. It was about building better. The formal board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Victor knew what was coming. He arrived early. Sat at the head of the table. Waited. The board members filed in. 12 of them. Investors. Major stakeholders. People who'd helped build Langford Properties into what it was. People who expected profit. Gerald was the first to speak. Victor, we've reviewed your proposal for Harrison Street. And we have serious concerns. I'm listening. This pivot, away from luxury development, toward affordable housing preservation, it's not aligned with our growth strategy. Our growth strategy has been displacement. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Our growth strategy has been urban revitalization. Call it what it is, Gerald. We've been pushing out poor people to make room for rich ones. A woman named Diane spoke up. She was one of the earliest investors. Victor, I understand you're dealing with a legal complication. But this kind of ideological shift, it's going to hurt us. Financially and reputationally. How? Investors want returns. They don't want social projects. Then maybe we need different investors. The room went cold. Gerald leaned forward. Victor, are you seriously willing to tank this company over one building? I'm willing to change this company because of what that one building represents. Which is the people we've ignored. The history we've erased. The damage we've done while calling it progress. Diane shook her head. This isn't like you. Maybe it should have been. Gerald stood. We're calling for a vote. Confidence in current leadership. All in favor of maintaining Victor Langford as CEO. 6 hands went up. All opposed. 6 hands. A tie. Gerald smiled coldly. Then we'll need to bring this to the shareholders. And I think we both know how that vote will go. Victor nodded calmly. Actually, you won't. Excuse me. Victor slid a folder across the table. I spoke with legal this morning. Turns out, there's a clause in our operating agreement. If ownership of a core asset is disputed, decision-making authority defaults to the majority stakeholder. Gerald frowned. You're the majority stakeholder. Not anymore. Victor opened the folder. Inside were documents transferring 15% of his personal shares into a community trust. As of this morning, I'm no longer the majority owner. The community trust is. Gerald's face went white. You can't do that. I already did. Diane leaned forward. Victor, what community trust? The one I just established. Managed by a board of local residents, non-profit leaders, and tenant advocates. Including Maribel Shaw. The room exploded. This is insane. You're destroying everything we built. This is corporate suicide. Victor stood. No. This is accountability. He looked around the table. For 25 years, we've made decisions about people's lives without ever asking them what they needed. We've displaced thousands. Erased histories. Prioritized profit over people. He paused. And I'm done. Gerald slammed his folder shut. Then you're done here. I know. Victor picked up his briefcase. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as CEO. The community trust will appoint interim leadership. And the Harrison Street project will proceed as a preservation effort, not a demolition. He walked toward the door. Diane called after him. Victor, you're walking away from a billion-dollar company. He stopped. Turned. No. I'm walking towards something that actually matters. And then he left. Behind him, the boardroom descended into chaos. But Victor felt lighter than he had in years. Because for the first time, he'd chosen people over profit. And he finally understood what his father never did. That real legacy isn't what you build. It's who you become while building it. The news broke within hours. Billionaire CEO resigns after ownership dispute with evicted tenant. Langford properties in turmoil as community trust takes control. Victor Langford steps down, cites moral reckoning over development practices. The media frenzy was immediate. Some outlets called it a redemption arc. Others called it corporate sabotage. Victor didn't read any of it. He was too busy doing something he'd never done before. Listening. The community trust held its first meeting at a local church. 50 people showed up. Tenants from Harrison Street. Residents from other buildings Langford Properties had acquired. Non-profit leaders. Advocates. And Maribel Shaw. She sat in the front row, quiet as always. Victor sat in the back. The meeting was led by Pastor Elaine Morris, a longtime community organizer. We're here to talk about what comes next. The Harrison Street building is now under trust management. That means we, the community, get to decide what happens. A man in his 60s raised his hand. Are the evictions reversed? Yes. All former tenants are invited to return. Rent controlled. With relocation assistance for the interim. Relief rippled through the room. A younger woman spoke up. What about the other buildings? The ones already demolished? Pastor Morris looked at Victor. Mr. Langford has agreed to fund a reparations program. Financial compensation for displaced tenants. Job training. Housing vouchers. How much? $50 million. Managed independently by the trust. Silence. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread. Victor didn't feel like he deserved it. After the meeting, Maribel approached him. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. Why? Victor looked at her. Because you were right. I spent my whole life building things without asking who I was displacing. And I can't undo the damage. But I can try to repair it. Maribel studied him. Restitution isn't forgiveness. I know. You can give people money. You can restore the building. But you can't give them back the years they lost. The communities you destroyed. Victor's throat tightened. I know. Maribel's expression softened. But it's a start. Victor nodded. What happens now? Now we rebuild. Properly. With the people who actually live here making the decisions. And me? Maribel smiled faintly. You do what you should have done from the beginning. You listen. You learn. And you get out of the way. Victor laughed despite himself. I can do that. Maribel extended her hand. Victor shook it. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not letting me get away with it. Maribel held his gaze. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world is a powerful person who never has to answer for what they do. She released his hand. You're answering now. Don't stop. Over the following months, Victor did something he'd never done. He worked without being in charge. He attended community meetings. Listened to tenant concerns. Helped fund programs without dictating how they ran. He met with families he'd displaced. Apologized. Wrote checks that could never make them whole but at least acknowledged the harm. It was humbling. Exhausting. And necessary. One evening, Victor stood outside the Harrison Street building. It was under renovation. Scaffolding covered the facade. Workers moved carefully, preserving original details while updating systems. The sign out front read, "Historic Preservation in Progress. Harrison Street Community Housing. EST 1983. Original design by Harold Shaw." Victor stared at Harold's name. The man his father had erased. The man whose daughter had saved Victor from his own worst instincts. He pulled out his phone and called Maribel. "Hi. Hi. I'm standing outside the building. How does it look? Like something worth saving?" Maribel was quiet for a moment. "My father would be proud." "Of me? Of what's happening? Of the building being preserved? Of his name being remembered?" Victor's voice cracked. "I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you." "Eventually." Victor smiled. "Eventually." "Victor?" "Yeah. Thank you. For doing the right thing. Even if it took too long." Victor closed his eyes. "It's the least I could do." They said goodbye and Victor stood there a while longer. Watching workers restore a building that had almost been demolished. Watching a community reclaim space that had almost been stolen. And understanding, finally, that power without accountability was just destruction with better PR. 6 months later, the Harrison Street building reopened. All 43 original tenants returned. The apartments were updated. New wiring. Efficient heating. Accessible elevators. But the character remained. The brick facade. The iron railings. The wide hallways where neighbors could stop and talk. It looked like what it was, a building designed by someone who cared about the people inside it. The grand reopening was small. Intentional. No press. No politicians. Just residents and community members. Pastor Morris said a few words. Maribel unveiled the plaque. Harrison Street Community Housing. Designed and built by Harold Shaw, 1983. Preserved by the community, 2024. The crowd applauded. Mrs. Kovac from 2A was crying. Mr. Diaz from 5C stood with his grandchildren, pointing out the apartment where they'd return next week. Victor stood at the back, watching. Maribel found him after the ceremony. "You didn't have to stay. I wanted to see it finished." "And?" Victor smiled. "It's beautiful." Maribel nodded. "It always was." People just stopped looking. They stood together in comfortable silence. Then Victor spoke. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "Starting a foundation. For historic preservation. Community-led development. Affordable housing protection." Maribel raised an eyebrow. "Another Billionaire foundation?" "No. A community foundation. I'd fund it. But the board would be residents. People who've been displaced. Advocates who've been fighting this fight longer than I've been alive. Would you be on the board?" "No. I just write the checks and stay out of the way." Maribel smiled. "That's growth. It's common sense. I've proven I don't know what communities need. Time to let them decide." Maribel studied him. "You really have changed." Victor shook his head. "I'm trying to. But I've got decades of damage to answer for." "This is just the beginning." A child ran past, laughing. His mother called after him, smiling. Victor watched them disappear into the building. "What's next for you?" Maribel asked. "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan." "How does that feel?" Victor considered. Terrifying. And kind of freeing. Maribel laughed. Welcome to how the rest of us live. Victor laughed too. They said goodbye and Victor walked back to his car. As he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. The building stood solid. Preserved. Alive. Not because of him. In spite of him. And that, he realized, was exactly how it should be. If you've ever had to unlearn something you thought was true, tell me about it in the comments. And if this story is reminding you that real change starts with admitting you were wrong, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We're almost done, and you don't want to miss how this ends. 2 years after the eviction notice slid under Maribel Shaw's door, she stood in the community room of the Harrison Street building. It was a Saturday morning. The room was full. Residents. Neighbors. Members of the community trust. They were celebrating the expansion of the Affordable Housing Protection Program to 12 additional buildings across the city. Maribel was asked to say a few words. She stood at the front, uncomfortable with the attention as always. I'm not good at speeches, she began. Someone in the crowd called out, "You're doing fine." Laughter. Maribel smiled. 2 years ago, I received an eviction notice. I was told I had 30 days to leave the only home I'd known for over a decade. The notice didn't ask if I had somewhere to go. It didn't ask if I could afford to move. It just told me I was in the way of progress. The room was silent. But I had something most people don't have. I had documents my father left me. Proof that I wasn't just a tenant. That I had rights. That I mattered. She paused. Most people don't have that proof. Most people just get displaced. Forgotten. Erased. Maribel looked around the room. This program isn't about me. It's about making sure that everyone, whether they have documents or not, is treated like they matter. Because they do. Applause filled the room. After the event, Maribel stood outside, watching children play in the newly renovated courtyard. Victor Langford approached. She hadn't seen him in several months. Hi. Hi. You came. Wouldn't miss it. That was a great speech. I meant what I said. I know. That's why it was great. They stood together, watching the courtyard. How are you? Maribel asked. Good. Different. I've been working with a non-profit. Helping them identify buildings at risk of predatory acquisition. On which side? Victor smiled. The right side, I hope. Maribel nodded. My father used to say that redemption isn't a destination. It's a direction. Your father was wise. He was. Victor hesitated. I've been meaning to ask you something. What? Do you forgive me? Maribel looked at him. I don't know yet. Victor nodded slowly. That's fair. But I'm not angry anymore. And I see you trying. That counts for something. Thank you. They stood in comfortable silence. Then Maribel spoke. Victor, can I tell you something? Of course. When you first evicted me, I could have used those documents immediately. I could have stopped you right away. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to see what you would do. If you would ask questions. If you would look beyond the paperwork and see people. Victor's chest tightened. And I failed. At first. But then you did something most powerful people never do. What? You admitted you were wrong. And you changed. Maribel smiled. That's rarer than you think. Victor's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry it took so long. Better late than never. A child ran up to Maribel. Ms. Shaw, we're starting the game. Are you playing? Maribel laughed. I'll be right there. The child ran off. Maribel looked at Victor. I have to go referee a kickball game. Will you be around? For a while. Good. Come find me after. Victor nodded. Maribel walked toward the courtyard, and Victor watched her go. She moved with the same quiet strength she'd always had. The kind of power that didn't need to shout. That didn't need to dominate. It just existed. Solid. Certain. Real. Victor had spent his entire life chasing a different kind of power. The kind that came with corner offices and skyline views. The kind that measured worth in dollars and square footage. But watching Maribel laugh with children in a courtyard her father had helped build, Victor understood something he'd missed for 50 years. Real power wasn't about what you owned. It was about what you protected. It wasn't about building higher. It was about building better. And it wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing others. Victor stayed for the kickball game. He didn't play. Just watched. And when it was over, he found Maribel again. Thank you, he said. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when I'd given up on myself. Maribel smiled. My father taught me that people are capable of change. Even when it seems impossible. He was right. Usually was. They shook hands. And as Victor walked away from the Harrison Street building for the last time, he felt something he'd never felt before. Peace. Not because he'd fixed everything. But because he'd finally stopped pretending he didn't need to. 5 years after the eviction notice, the Harrison Street building still stands. 43 families still live there. Rent controlled. Protected. Harold Shaw's name is on the plaque at the entrance. The community trust manages 17 buildings now. Over 800 units of affordable housing across the city. Victor Langford is no longer a billionaire. He gave most of it away. To the trust. To reparations programs. To organizations fighting displacement. He lives in a smaller apartment. Consults for nonprofits. Spends his time learning instead of dictating. And sometimes, on Saturday mornings, he stops by Harrison Street. Watches the courtyard. Sees the children play. Talks with residents who've heard the story but treat him like anyone else. Maribel still works at the library. Still lives simply. Still carries the key to a drawer filled with documents that changed everything. And every year, on the anniversary of her father's death, she stands in front of the building and whispers the same thing. We did it, Dad. We remembered. Some people look poor because they refuse to weaponize what they own. Some people get dismissed because powerful people never learn to look closer. And sometimes, the person you evict is the foundation holding everything up. Victor Langford learned that the hard way. But he learned. And in the end, that's what mattered. Not that he was perfect. But that he was finally willing to be wrong. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this: your worth isn't determined by who sees it. It just is. If you've ever made a mistake you thought was unforgivable, remember this: change is possible. But only if you're willing to do the work. And if you've ever wondered whether one person can make a difference, remember this: Maribel Shaw saved 43 families by refusing to be silent when it mattered most. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just whispers. And waits for the right moment to be heard. Now go. See the people in front of you. Ask questions before making decisions. And remember that buildings aren't just investments, they're homes. Because that's what legacy really means. Not what you build. But who you protect while building it. If this story reminded you to look closer, to ask questions, to value people over profit, share it. Tag someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Mr. Ellington Love Lines, because every week, we tell stories that prove quiet strength is still strength, and that it's never too late to do the right thing. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time matters. And so does your voice. Now go use it.